Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to EJC Online Classroom Platform. I am Orzella Miller, Vice Principal of Student Affairs and History Teacher at Kingsway High School. Now, last week, we went into the interpretation of questions, and I did promise you that I would come back to do some multiple choice questions. And I'm here today, this afternoon, to do just that. We will be looking on some multiple choice questions because this is what you will be doing in exams. Now, you are in school, fifth formers, and I know that after classes, you will be going to review what I am about to do here now. But before I actually start to teach, remember, we must sanitize. Yes, so I have my sanitizer here, and we must sanitize. Yes, this is a way of preventing contraction of the COVID virus, so we keep sanitizing. And I am equipped with my mask, my beautiful mask. I will not be able to use it while teaching, but as soon as I go on the outside, I will have to put on my mask, right? Before I go into the actual lesson, we must invite the presence of the Lord in our midst. Let us pray. Great God and our Father, once more we come, dear Father. Lord, as I'm about to teach to your children, Lord, wherever they are, Lord, you are the master teacher, and I'm depending on you, dear Father, to help that these questions that will be put forth, dear Father, they will be of value and benefit to these children as they prepare to go into exam. Be with us, Lord, as you have been with us in the past. Continue to be with us and grant us your blessings. In Jesus' name I pray. Okay then, so multiple choice. Remember now, when you go into exam, you must read carefully your multiple choice questions. You can only give one answer, which should be the correct answer. And if you are wrong, you're just wrong. So that is why we have to listen carefully. We have to read carefully. Now, I have here number 1. Which of the following supplied the largest number of immigrant workers to the British West Indies after emancipation? So simple means after emancipation. Simple means after the slaves were freed and had a choice. The planters had was to import immigrant workers to come to help with the work on the plantation. So the answer is not India, it is not Madeira, it is not Africa. The correct answer that you are seeing on your screen there in yellow is China. China supplied the British West Indies with the most immigrant workers after emancipation. Got that? Okay. So we are going to move on to question number 2. You're going to identify the group that contributed to the rise of the rice industry in the British West Indian territories, right? So you have there East Indian immigrants, enslaved Africans, no. Chinese immigrants, no. We have the indentured Europeans. So that's the correct answer. Correct answer in yellow, indentured Europeans. Okay then, which of the following is evidence of the operation of peasantry in the British West Indies during the second half of the 19th century. Now, you would want to think or to ask, who is a peasant? Right? So a peasant is a farmer who has at least 2.5 acres of land. Right? Is that a rich person? This person depends on the soil to eke out his or her living. And this person doesn't have a whole lot of acreage of land. At least 2.5. So this person is a peasant, right? So yeah, we are asking, which of the following is evidence of operation of the peasantry in the British West Indies during the second half of the 19th century? So we have the dominance of the beet sugar over cane. No. The horrible living condition in the rural areas. No. The production of a variety of cash crops in commercial quantities. No. We have an increase in the number of vagrants throughout the regions. Right? That's the correct answer. And you might be asking, who is a vagrant? Right? So this is a person who was like unstable. Right? They doesn't have a lot of possessions. Right? And the only thing that they could earn their living from was to eke out again out of the soil as a peasant. So the correct answer is an increase in the number of vagrants throughout the regions. Right. Identify the crop that was not produced by peasantry in the British West Indies in the second half of the 19th century. And students, you should be looking now keenly that most questions identify us with the British West Indies because we are in the British territory, right? So you are not in the French, you are not in the Dutch, you are not in the Spanish, you are in the British West Indies, right? So it's in the second half of the 19th century. You should identify the crop that was not produced by peasantry, right? So the peasant produced bananas, yes. They produced yam, they produced ginger, right? But they weren't producing sugar cane because the sugar industry was on a low now, and peasants don't produce sugar in such a large scale to earn from it, right? And so it was sugar cane that was not produced in the second half of the 19th century by peasants. Remember that peasants are lowly people, not rich to have money to go into sugar production. And so you would have realized that sugar cane was not produced by the peasants. Remember now, look carefully. Was not. Okay? Right. So, which island became known as the Spice Island? Remember, if you are a social studies student, you would have done the resources of the islands. When you are doing resources, you would have known that Barbados is not a spice island. Dominica is not a spice island. St. Kitts does not produce a lot of spices. Grenada is known. Grenada is known as the spice island of the Caribbean. Spices in large quantities are produced in Grenada. Example of spices, you might be wondering, what is Miss talking about? What kind of spices are she's speaking about? Now, an example, nutmeg that you use in the porridge and to spice up the different things when you're mixing the chocolate tea and all of that. An example of spice. Grenada is known as the spice island of the Caribbean. Crown land. Crown land was most commonly available for setting up of free villages in the following group of territories. Right? What is crown land? Right? Crown lands are large expanses of land that are owned, even up to today, they are owned by the government, right? In the days of slavery, they were owned by the planters, right? So we call them crown land, large expanses of land that were not under production. And so after slavery was abolished, these idle lands, right, were used to help to set up free villages. What is a free village? Right? A free village is communities, villages that were set up after the slaves were given their freedom. So automatically they call it a free village. Right? So an example of a free village is those villages that were set up after slavery was abolished. So Guyana, Jamaica, and Trinidad had a lot of free villages. Free villages. They had a lot of land to accommodate the setting up of free villages in Jamaica or in the British territories. All the following were benefits which the ex-slaves gained from setting up free villages, except, yes, it is like a community setting. It was like a community setting. So you have a place of worship. For remember now that the slaves, they love to worship. So they had a place of worship, right? They had land on which to grow crops for consumption and sale. Yes, creation of a distance between ex-slaves and planters. Yes, right? But social facilities equal to those of the whites. The slaves did not have any such facilities, right? They didn't have anything outside of a place of worship, land on which to grow crops for consumption and sales, creation of a distance between ex-slaves and planters, right? They did not have like a club to go to. You would say where the whites go to socialize. They did not have that, right? They did not have no social facilities equal to those of the whites. As a matter of fact, what they had was just their homes, and they would sit and gather in their homes to tell stories. Not anywhere a building to facilitate them socializing. They did not have anything like that. So the next question asks, which territory did not have a strike or riot in the 1930s because of difficulties faced by the lower classes? All right. So, take for example, in Jamaica, in the 1930s, when you listen, there was a lot of disturbances among the working classes in Jamaica in the 1930s. And you will recall Bustamante was a champion for the working classes in Jamaica in the 1930s. And there was where you had the origination of where trade unions came about. Trade unions originated because of the strikes and the unrest that were in Jamaica in the 1930s. Just an example. And you hear that Bustamante was the champion for the working people in Jamaica. An example. And Grantley Adams and all the other persons that work along in the different Caribbean islands with the working classes who were facing a lot of difficulties, and they had to have persons to stand up for them. And another example was Uriah Butler, Bradshaw, and all those men who fought for the betterment, the better lives for the people of the Caribbean. And so the answer would have been Antigua. Antigua did not have a riot in the 1930s. The commission that Britain sent to the West Indies to investigate the social and economic condition of the masses following the strikes and riots was known as. Right, many of you might not be acquainted with the answer for these questions, but as I said before, the previous question spoke about riots, the disturbances on the islands, right? And we will use Jamaica as an example, where, for example, even the Morant Bay Rebellion, the different riots that broke out among the working classes in Jamaica because they were not getting the wages they were supposed to get. Nothing was happening for these people. And so they riot for better payment, better wages, right? And so because Britain was still ruling the islands in the British Caribbean, Britain was still in charge. So a commission known as the Moyne Commission was sent to Jamaica and the other islands to find out what was the main cause of these disturbances. So the commission that Britain sent to the West Indies to investigate the social and economic condition after slavery, these people were living under very, very poor conditions. No water, no roads, distress, poverty brought on by long drought, periods of drought, and all sorts of things were happening on the islands. And so the people, the masses, were not happy. And so we have social conditions and social unrest that led to Britain sending a group of persons to come to investigate what was really taking place, and this was known as the Moyne Commission. Now, the now famous quote, 1 from 10 leaves 0, was made by which leader under which circumstance? With what circumstances? Now, you know that the different Caribbean islands, they came together to form what we call the West Indians Federation, and the prime ministers from the different countries, you know, they came together, 10 of them, and of course, Bustamante was the Prime Minister of Jamaica at that time, and Jamaica was the foremost of all the 10 countries that came together to form this federation. But for some reason or the other, Bustamante thought that, you know, I want to come out of this thing, you know, and I'm no longer interested in this federation, this thing here. So I'm going to come out. So Eric Williams and Eric Williams coined the famous statement when Bustamante decided was to leave, that 1 from 10 leaves 0. Simple means Bustamante had the most, he was the best man to be in the Federation. And if he was going to leave, then it's better everything just stop right there. So 1 from 10 leave 0. So the answer would have been Eric Williams and the decision of Jamaica to withdraw from the Federation. So that was a famous statement made by Eric Williams when he says that 1 from 10 leaves 0. So Bustamante leaving the Federation, it didn't make sense anymore. 10 of them, the one that was most impressionable, he was leaving, so it's better we stop. Okay. By the first half of the 20th century, a number of Caribbean leaders had formed trade unions and political parties, identified the incorrect match. So there is Michael Manley, People's National Party, yes, that is correct. Eric Williams, People's National Movement, yes. Grantley Adam, People's National Congress. Seabird, Antigua Labour Party. So everyone is correctly matched. Only Grantley Adams is incorrectly matched with People's National Congress. Right? So all the others are correctly matched. So Britain abolished the slave trade in 1607, no. 1707, no. 1907, no. The slave trade was abolished in 1807. And remember now, the slave trade is different from when slavery was abolished. The slave trade being abolished in 1807 simply means that no country that was involved in slavery should still continue to import slaves. The trading in slavery stopped in 1807. So no slave ship was going back and forth on the Atlantic seas. And if they were caught, maybe they would be prosecuted, because the trade in slavery was abolished in 1807. The British Caribbean planters who supported the abolition of the slave trade did so mainly because of law, religion, morality. So economics would have been the correct answer. The British Caribbean planters who supported the abolition of the slave trade did so mainly because of economics. All the following were arguments against slavery. All right? Look carefully. All the following were arguments against slavery, except it was an immoral act. Yes, it was an immoral act. The system was inefficient and wasteful. Sure, it was wasteful in the sense that thousands of precious lives were wasted. Right? There was no economic benefits to the colonies. Of course, there was no economic benefits to the colonies because the previous question we had as it relates to disturbances in the British Caribbean and other territories were because there was no economic benefit to the colonies. Why, when slavery was abolished, the people had such hard times. That's why there were so many disturbances, because these territories, these mother countries did not do anything to help the colonies in which they were eking out every resources out of these colonies and not doing anything. So when these people were made free, they had nothing to live off. So slavery had already existed in other societies. So this argument was not against slavery, because they want to say that slavery had already existed in other societies, which didn't make sense, or it did not justify the reason why a system such as slavery should be set up. West Indian merchants and planters in the early 19th century believed that continued wealth in the islands depended upon, right? So West Indian merchants and planters in the early 19th century believed that continued wealth in the island depended upon the abolition of slave trade. They didn't want it to be abolished. The conscience of the planter class, the outcome of religious rivals. No, the continuation of the slave labor, right? They didn't want these people to be freed. And they're saying that the only way we can have continued wealth in the islands was if we still have these people working under the system of slavery. But this did not happen when they were under bondage, under slavery, because there were nothing to show any economic wealth in these islands because of slave labor. So this argument was the argument that the planters brought forward, the continuation of slave labor. And as we continue, abolitionists saw the amelioration proposal as a way to. You might be asking the question, what is amelioration? Now, in the light that slavery was about to be abolished, right? Before the act really was passed, there was a system set up, a proposal, amelioration. Simple means that the life of the slaves would have been improved on the plantation. And there were certain things that the planters should not do to the slaves. Say whipping was exempt. Slaves could now stay with their families, even though in the British Caribbean, the planters still did not want families to be together. But an amelioration proposal was to see to it that the life of the slave was improved on the plantation. Even though they were not yet freed, but their life should be improved. So, the correct answer would have been improve the condition of slaves in the British Caribbean. So that would have been the correct answer. The saints were also known as the Clapham Church, the Quakers, or the Baptists. Now, the saints was another name for the Clapham sect. These were groups, right? These were groups of missionaries, group of people who set out to help to fight against the system of slavery. So, based on what I'm seeing here, you could go into exams and you could see these two being used interchangeably. Either you have the saints, right? Or if they don't send, they could send the Clapham sect. That was a group of people in Britain who they were helping to fight against the system of slavery. So the Clapham sect, or they were otherwise called the saints. Next question. The judge in the Somerset case ruled that the abolition of the slave trade should be delayed for another 2 years. Okay, which of the following was not one of the amelioration proposal? Religious instruction should be given to the slaves. Yes. The sale of slaves for a master's debt should be forbidden. Yes. Slave families should not be separated. Yes. Whipping for all slaves should be terminated. So, they continue to say, depending on the degree of maybe violation, the slave would be whipped. So it is not all slaves, but whipping would have continued on a lesser than before. So, which of the following was not one of the amelioration proposal? They did not want to stop the whipping because this was a driving force for the people called slaves to work. So they did not want to use this as one of the proposals to let the slaves have a better living condition or a better life on the plantation. So, which of the following slave revolt was widely publicized by the abolitionists to gain support for the abolition of slavery? So, it was not the Haitian Revolution, it was not the Bossa Revolt, it was not the Takis Revolt, but it was the Christmas Rebellion that took place here in Jamaica, the Christmas Rebellion, otherwise known as the Sam Sharp Rebellion, and also as the Baptist Rebellion. This was the rebellion of all rebellions, right, that took place and saw the death of Sam Sharp. And it sent waves all through Great Britain. And so this was the rebellion, the mother of all rebellions, that had them thinking. And in a few months after this great rebellion, slavery, the law was passed for slavery to be abolished. And it really, really came through when Sam Sharp said, "I rather die on yonder gallows than to be a slave." He taught the slaves that they were not to subject themselves to slavery, and that all men were born free, and that they would strive for freedom. And it did happen shortly after his death. The abolitionists used one of the following methods to assist in their campaign. They used all the following methods to assist in their campaign against slavery, except, yes, so these abolitionists, they use the newspaper, they use pamphlets, they use the pulpit, You might ask, how did they use the pulpit to do that, to do their campaign? So whilst they were preaching to the slaves and preaching to other people, they would speak out against slavery. Now, telegraphs were not an option because in that time, telegraph did not exist, right? So you would have think carefully about the newspaper. Remember, the slaves used to read the newspaper, especially the domestic slaves who would work in the house. They used to read the newspaper coming down from Great Britain. They knew that slavery would soon be abolished, or they would read and tell the other slaves what were happening. So yes, newspaper existed. Pamphlets, yes, these persons fighting against slavery would print pamphlets and distribute them. And as I said before, they used the pulpit when they preach, but telegraph was not in existence. The East India interests comprised of people who had recently arrived in the Caribbean from India. The East India interests comprised of people who had recently arrived in the Caribbean from India. They abolished the slave trade, were sending Africans to India, disgruntled West Indian planters. They had business. So the East India interest was a group of people. They had business interests in India and felt it was best to abolish the slave trade, were sending Africans to India, disgruntled with West Indian planters. So, you had a group of people. We look on the Clapham sect a while ago, and you want to find out the persons who were involved in this group here. So, was it William Wilberforce, William Knibb, Granville Sharp, or Zachary McCullough? No. Lord Mansfield, William Wilberforce, William Knibb, Granville Sharp? No. Granville Sharp, William Wilberforce, James Somerset, Thomas Clarkson. Now, the correct answer for the group of persons who made up the Clapham sect, comprised of William Wilberforce, Thomas Clarkson, Granville Sharp, Zachary McCullough. So these are the persons who were the driving force behind fighting to help to put an end to slavery, and they were called the Clapham sect. Now, this question asks, which of the following skills did the Tainos, or the Arabs, and Kalinagos, otherwise called the Caribs, both possessed? Now, you know that these people had things in common, right? But one of them was, they were more industrious than the other. So the Tainos were more industrious than the Kalinagos. The Kalinagos were unsettled, and their main interest was war. So they did not sit down to organize a community life, because their foremost interest, they were going to war, right? So the Kalinagos did not sit down to make pottery and basketry. They didn't do any of those things, right? So they didn't have time, yes, but they also, as I said before, had things in common, right? So they would do a little pottery, do a little basketry, but not as much as the Taínos. They didn't write, they didn't do math, and so at that time, it is only pottery and basket making that these two indigenous set of people would have done. But on a larger scale, it was the Taínos. It was the Taínos who would have been more indulged in these things than the Kalinagos. Which of the following group of islands was inhabited mainly by the Taínos before the arrival of the Europeans? Right? History will tell us that it is not St. Kitts, Bahamas, and Belize, St. Vincent, Barbados, and Martinique, Grenada, Trinidad, or St. Lucia. Right? So, when Columbus came, he saw Taínos in Cuba, he saw Taínos in Hispaniola, and he saw Taínos in Jamaica. So the Taínos had already inhabited Cuba, Hispaniola, and Jamaica. So when Columbus came, he saw the Taínos on these islands, Cuba, Hispaniola, and Jamaica. Which of the following weapons were not used by the Kalinagos? Right? So, of course, they used wooden shields. Of course, they used short clubs. Of course, they used poison on the tip of their arrows to kill their enemies. Bronze axes. They did not have any of that in those times. Anything they had was made out of wood and stone. Anything that they used in that time when they existed were made out of wood, stone, and bones. So they did not have bronze axes to use. The first island to be visited by Christopher Columbus and on his first voyage to the New World. Right? The first island to be visited by Columbus on his voyage to the New World was not Cuba, not Puerto Rico, not Hispaniola, but Bahamas. A newly arrived enslaved African on a typical sugar estate was nicknamed. Was it the newcomer? Was it guinea hen or freshers? No. A newcomer on the arrival on a typical sugar estate was nicknamed guinea bird. Guinea bird. The British Act of Emancipation was passed in the year 1831, 1832, 1834. No, the correct answer would have been 1833, when the Act of Emancipation was passed. So 1833, the Act of Emancipation was passed. Who among the following were appointed to act as mediators between the planters and the apprentices in the apprenticeship system? Was it the Justices of the Peace, West India Regiment, Nonconformist Missionary? No, we have people who we call stipendiary magistrate, right? And they were the ones that they were appointed when there were problems between the planters and those that were partially freed. You call them apprentices. You would have problems on the estates. And so these magistrates, stipendiary magistrates, would be the ones to go in and intervene between the planters and these apprentices. So, next question. The Chinese were not preferred by the planters, mainly because is it because they were too short and could not see above the sugar cane? Is it that they demanded higher wages than the Indians? Is it because they could not speak English well? There was a myriad of reasons why the Chinese were not preferred by the planters, because the Chinese did not like hard labor. And as soon as they landed on the plantation, they would try to leave the plantation to go and set up businesses, to set up wholesale and retail businesses. They would go to anything else. They would go and open up shops to do anything else apart from working on the plantation. They did not like the plantation system, so they didn't spend half of the time on the plantation. They did not want to stay on the plantation. The peasantry can be attributed with all the following except. Peasantry can be attributed with all the following except. An increase in the number of markets. Yes, as I said to you, peasants are people who work the soil to make a living. So if most persons after slavery did not have an education, the only way they could live is to work the soil. So everybody were peasants. Everybody were farming. And so, of course, you're going to have a number of markets. So what are you going to do with the things when you plant them? You must carry them to the market to sell. And everybody cannot hold in the same market. So, of course, you're going to have an increase in the number of markets. So an increase in the volume of grown provision. Very well, as I said before, most persons are planting. 80% of the ex-slaves were farming. Apart from those who had a little skill, 80% of them were eking out their existence out of the soil. So you're going to have a lot of grown provision. And where are they going to stay? They're going to set up a lot of markets. So markets were set up in all the parishes. So you have an increase in grown provision and you have an increase in markets. Now, so you're going to have better land use. Are you going to have better land use? Or you're going to have a decrease in the price of land? Right? Peasantry can be attributed with all the following except a decrease in the price of land. Right? So, identify the territory where the United States did not lease a base during World War II. Right? Identify the territory where the United States did not lease a base during World War II. And so we see it is not Jamaica, it's not Antigua, It's not Trinidad, but it is Belize. Right? So the answer to this question would have been Belize. So we have exhausted all our questions for this afternoon. And I am sure that these multiple choice questions will better help you to go into exam and be able to choose the correct answers. These along with all those that you have been studying over the time that you're at home. I wish for you success in your history exams, and you are asked to go online and to find other mediums through which you can get past papers and to get other questions to be successful in your exam coming up very early. So, I won't be seeing you again before your exams. So I wish you God's richest blessings, and all the success is yours. Thank you.